talk is based on joint research with our colleagues from Slovenia, from the University of Maribor, Martin Justin and Borut Trpin, and Christian Strasser here in Bochum. So let me give a little bit introduction into this topic to explain why we are talking about zetetic social epistemology. Zetetic term in epistemology, which has emerged in the recent years, is broadly construed the idea that zetetic norms, which are norms of inquiry, simply put, require special attention for the better understanding of not only inquiry, but also knowledge and belief formation. So the idea is that at the core of normative epistemology, there should be not just belief formation and discussion of belief formation, but also rational inquiry and its interplay with rational belief formation. Now, when we speak about inquiry and when we look back into philosophy of science and social epistemology of science, there is a long tradition of work on this topic. So norms of inquiry, or zetetic norms, as they are more popularly called nowadays, have long been studied in this body of literature concerning the questions such as how is knowledge acquired through socially organized inquiry, how should the scientific community be organized to achieve an optimal division of cognitive labor, or when should we engage in scientific inquiry, what makes scientific theories worthy of pursuit, etc. More recently, social epistemology of science has focused on the question how individual inquiry impacts the collective inquiry. And because this question concerns the complex social dynamics of scientific inquiry, philosophers have started using computer simulations in the form of agent-based models. So you might have heard of these models. I think some of those previous talks might have touched upon this tool. But in this framework, agents are represented as scientists who are following certain norms of inquiry. And then we can use these simulations to examine how local interactions between agents bring about certain emergent social patterns in a controlled and gradual manner. So we can check what happens if scientists behave in a certain way at the level of the community. Do they polarize? Do they fragment? Do they reach a correct consensus? And if so, under which conditions of inquiry? And we can do that in a controlled way by focusing on specific factors while abstracting away from others. So that allows us to ask some interesting what-if questions. What happens if scientists behave that way rather than another way? Now, a common assumption in this literature is that individuals should base their pursuits on their beliefs. And I will call this the reductive thesis for zetetic norms. So this is the view that zetetic norms are reducible to epistemic norms. So for example, models such as Duven's model of peer disagreement, which studies the impact of norms of peer disagreement on collective inquiry, assumes that scientists' investigative choices of the given hypothesis should be represented in the same way as their opinions about this hypothesis. Or Zollman's bandit models in network epistemology are typically done in such a way that agents pursue a hypothesis they believe to have the highest probability of success. And so there has been a whole body of models where the common assumption or shared assumption in these models is that scientists should pursue what they believe, or not that they should, but simply that's how they conduct inquiry. They always go for the hypothesis they believe to be the best. And so we call that the reductive thesis for zetetic norms. But beyond computational philosophy, other discussions in social epistemology have considered zetetic norms as simply irrelevant for epistemic ones. So we call this the irrelevance thesis for zetetic norms, as the view that zetetic norms are just not relevant for the study of epistemic norms. And so take, for example, the peer disagreement debate, which has focused on the question, which norms should guide belief revision in the face of disagreement, where disagreement with a certain epistemic peer, regardless of the norms that guide their inquiry. Now, this has turned to be problematic for the study of scientific disagreements, where the dimension of inquiry really matters. And so there has been literature pointing out this neglect and the missed opportunity to look at this impact of the norms of inquiry. So what we have as the state of the art is that due to the reductive and irrelevance thesis, there has been no systematic consideration of zetetic norms guiding individual inquirers, and as a result, norms of collective inquiry have so far been explored only partially. So norms of collective inquiry, in the sense of norms that would benefit the collective outcomes of scientific inquiry, have been explored either by largely, there are some exceptions, but they have largely been explored by assuming that zetetic norms can simply be reduced to epistemic ones, or they can simply be ignored. And this includes norms for how scientific community should be organized to avoid premature consensus on a wrong theory, how to safeguard science from the pernicious influence of industrial bias and deception, how to handle scientific disagreements so as to avoid polarization. This is a paper by our own team where we have also employed this reductive thesis, and how to handle confirmation bias in research. Now, once we take zetetic norms seriously and we really ask how scientists should conduct their inquiry, then we can look at specific combinations of epistemic and zetetic norms and their impact on collective inquiry. And we can ask, how do these specific combinations impact inquiry? When do epistemic and zetetic norms come apart, in the sense that the collective inquiry benefits from scientists' pursuits not being based on their beliefs? So this would be scientists inquiring something which they don't necessarily believe, because that might ultimately benefit collective inquiry. Or we can ask which zetetic norms for individual inquiry promote successful inquiry. And since these questions, once again, concern complex social dynamics, in many cases, they will require computational tools. So the aim of this talk is to argue for the importance of the zetetic turn in social epistemology with a concrete example. So what we want to argue is that the questions which I have on the previous slide are important, and we want to give an example of a model which represents scientific disagreements and which shows how different combinations of zetetic and epistemic norms for individual agents impact collective inquiry, and that depending on the combination which we have at play, we will have different outcome at the level of the community. And since there is a different outcome, that raises the question, well, what combinations of zetetic and epistemic norms are important in various circumstances, which has so far not been systematically studied. Okay, so here is the plan for the talk. Because our model is motivated by the peer disagreement debate, I will say a few words about this debate in social epistemology, and then I will introduce our model, present the results, and then I will say a few words in the conclusion concerning where can we go from here. So the peer disagreement debate, it has a long tradition in social epistemology, and you might have heard about it through these restaurant cases where you're with a person who has similar intellectual capacities as you and the same evidence, and you're in a restaurant, you have gotten a bill, and now you calculate one price, you have to split the bill, but you calculate different values. So you think you should pay 24 euros, and your peer thinks you should pay 25 euros each. And now the question is, what should you do in this situation? Well, in the restaurant bill case, you should obviously recalculate, so that's not particularly interesting. But in the context of more complicated disagreements, such as scientific disagreement, the question becomes much trickier. So suppose I'm a scientist who has good reasons to consider a certain theory the best account of a given domain or phenomena, and suppose you are a peer, so you are just as expert as I am, and you disagree. So suppose we have exchanged our reasons, and I still believe I'm right, and that you're wrong, and the other way around, you believe that you're right and that I'm wrong. And now I'm confronted with the question, does the fact that you, as another expert in the field, who is my peer, disagree with me mean that I should weaken my confidence or even entirely suspend my belief in this theory? So I'm in a situation where I have first order evidence. This is this FOE. So I have first order evidence. This is the literature I have gathered on this theory. So empirical studies, experiments, all kinds of considerations that have influenced my belief in this theory. And that this theory is the best theory of the given domain, in the given domain. But I also have higher order evidence, namely evidence that not everybody agrees and that indicates that I might be wrong after all. And so the force of this higher order evidence or higher order defeat indicates that maybe I should weaken my stance after all. Now, in the epistemology of peer disagreement, three norms have emerged as particularly interesting as guiding epistemic agents in this context. So first of all, conciliatory norm, according to which I should lower my credence in T or split the difference with you. So we should try to meet halfway when it comes to our credence concerning this theory. Then there has been discussion proposing steadfast norm, according to which one should stick to their guns. So I should just keep my credence in this theory unchanged. And then there have been proposals for confidence or resilience related norms where I should keep my credence but lower my confidence in this belief. So I should be a little bit more easier to get convinced when in future receiving new counter evidence and easier to change my mind. And then there have been some context-dependent approaches suggesting that what one should do in the context of peer disagreement is ultimately a contextual issue. So we have to decide from one context to another. Now, when we think about peer disagreement in science, it's important to consider also the impact on collective inquiry. Because even though we might decide that at the level of individual rationality, it is rational, for instance, to suspend judgment or to weaken your credence in a given proposition, the question is, how will that impact the group performance, so the performance at the level of the scientific community? And as we know from the work of Maya, Wilson, and colleagues, there is an independence between individual rationality and group performance. So norms which might be optimal or which we might consider rational for individual epistemic agents might backfire at the level of the community, and the other way around. Certain norms which we don't consider to be rational at the level of individuals might lead to optimal collective inquiry. And so in order to check how specific norms guiding peer disagreement impact the collective outcomes, philosophers have reached for agent-based models. And in particular, Igor Duven developed a model of opinion dynamics aimed to represent scientific disagreements, where agents try to approximate a noisy truth signal. And then he represents steadfast agents as agents who update their beliefs only on the truth signal, and conciliatory agents as those who also take into account beliefs of other agents. And what his model finds is that the community of steadfast agents reaches a faster, though less accurate consensus than the community of conciliatory scientists. So his results look a little bit like this. And so what we see here on the x-axis is the timeline of the model. This is a standard opinion dynamics model where each of the lines represent the development of the opinion of a certain agent, and the truth signal is here at 0.75. And here we see the community of conciliatory agents who are all averaging within a certain bounded confidence, and then they meet somewhere around the truth signal. But they do that later, at a later time point than the community of steadfast agents, which converge around the truth signal relatively quickly, but then they oscillate around it because of the noise. And so Duven argues that this shows a trade-off between the speed and accuracy. Now, there are certain problems with this model, which we discuss in a paper, and which I don't want to go now into because it's a bit, it would distract from the main line, but maybe we can get to that in the Q&A. For now, the interesting question is, how are zetetic norms expressed in this and other models of peer disagreement? And what we see here at play is this reductive thesis for zetetic norms, according to which zetetic norms are reducible to epistemic ones. So Duven's agents simply inquire what they believe. There is no distinction between their epistemic norm or what they consider to be the, how their belief is formed, and what they inquire, what they pursue. And we see that also in other models of scientific disagreement, such as the Lange's model from 2013, or with models developed in our group in Bochum here, which are based on bandit models, where agents once again pursue a hypothesis they believe to have the highest probability of success. So that raises the question, are we missing something by reducing zetetic norms to epistemic ones? And to answer this question, we tested the performance of epistemic communities under different zetetic norms, and we measure how well different combinations of epistemic and zetetic norms guide the community to correct consensus. So I will now introduce the model which we use to study these questions. So what we use is the standard bandit model. Bandit models are based on the analogy between science and gambling. So if we imagine a gambler coming to a casino, the gambler may be confronted with slot machines which have different payoffs, and she has to decide which of these payoffs to stick with and play in order to maximize her rewards. Now, she might initially test, let's say that she's confronted with 2 slot machines, which is bandit is a colloquial term for a slot machine. So suppose she is confronted with 2 bandits. Well, she will first test both, and then at some point she will realize, oh, this one is giving me a higher reward, so I should stick with that one. But she's confronted with the trade-off between exploration and exploitation. If she explores longer, she will have a more information to form opinion about which of these bandits is better. But at the same time, she might be wasting her time, her resources, because if she early sticks with the bandits which gives her a higher payoff, she will ultimately get a higher reward. And Kevin Zollman, when he introduced bandit models into social epistemology of science, argued that we have a same analogy in the context of scientific inquiry. So if you consider a scientist who is confronted with 2 hypotheses, such as 2 hypotheses concerning 2 different medical treatments for a given disease, this scientist is also in this kind of exploration-exploitation trade-off, because she could be testing different treatments, but ultimately she wants to treat all the patients with the better out of the 2 treatments. So she has to decide at which point to stop testing them and just give the same treatment to everybody. And so in the bandit models, which have been used in social epistemology, pulling of the bandit's arm is analogous to conducting an empirical study which tests a hypothesis. A win from a slot machine corresponds to a successful application of this hypothesis, so successful outcome of the treatment, and the objective probability of success, which we use to define this bandit, is analogous to the objective probability of success of the given treatment. So what happens in the standard bandit models is that scientists face 2 hypotheses, such as 2 medical treatments, and then they gather evidence, and they update their beliefs as Bayesian reasoners based on their own evidence and evidence they receive from other scientists in the community, where they receive evidence depending on the kind of social network they are in. And here the example, the standardly studied social networks. Importantly, in standard bandit models, the scientists will always choose to pursue the treatment they believe to be better. So they are employing what we call the reductive zetetic norm. Okay, so we start from this bandit framework, but now we make some changes. So usually agents in bandit models communicate by sharing first-order evidence about their experiments. So they make pools from random pools from a certain probability distribution, and then they share this evidence with other agents in their network. But in order to represent different epistemic norms, our agents will also have to share higher order evidence about the disagreement. And so we will model this as scientists observing what others pursue, meaning which bandit they are pulling from, and learning what others believe. So they will be sharing the credences about the bandits they consider to be better. They will be sharing the credences about both bandits which they are aware of. They are aware of both bandits, so they will be just sharing all these credences. And we study how different combinations of zetetic and epistemic norms impact the frequency of the community in converging on the better of the 2 hypotheses. So here are the steps in our model. Agents choose a bandit according to one of the zetetic norms, and I will say in a moment which zetetic norms we study. Then they test a chosen bandit, then they share their data, then they update their credences, and then they share their credences about both of these bandits, and then they update their credences based on beliefs of other agents, so based on these credences, according to one of the epistemic norms. So let me now say how we model different zetetic norms and how we model different epistemic norms. Okay, so how we model zetetic norms. So zetetic norms of inquiry concern the question how scientists choose which of the two bandits to pursue. So we study three different norms of inquiry. You might consider all three of them idealized, but that's fine. This model is highly idealized. The idea is really to see whether we get anything interesting out of different combinations of zetetic and epistemic norms. So first of all, we look at the reductive zetetic norm, which is what I've already mentioned. This is where agents inquire what they believe. So they simply pursue the bandit they believe has the highest probability of success. Then we look at exploratory zetetic norm. So this is a norm where agents most of the time pull from the bandit they believe to be better, but with a small probability, they also pull from the other bandit. So far it's exploratory. They never fully abandon the other one. And then we have the sticky zetetic norm, or what we could call zetetic steadfastness, where agents are exploration averse. So they stick with their current bandit even when they receive the evidence that the other one is better, and there is a certain counter, and then they abandon this current theory or bandit only after this a certain number of rounds. So the idea of this zetetic norm is that scientists, suppose somebody who is in a lab, they have received information that the other hypothesis is better, but they are thinking, okay, I should not just abandon my current theory, I should stick with it, test it a bit more and see if I can improve it. And only if I repeatedly get information that the other theory is better, then I will give up on my current one. So this is the idea behind this norm. Okay, let me now say how we modeled different epistemic norms. So these are the norms from the literature on peer disagreement, and we consider three different types of norms. First is the conciliatory epistemic norm, where agents dissolve all disagreements by aggregating their credences every round after updating an evidence. Then the steadfast epistemic norm, where agents learn about the beliefs of others, but they stick to their guns in the face of disagreement. And then we look at epistemic norms which impact their confidence, where by confidence, we mean resilience of credences to new evidence. So the idea behind this is that your beliefs don't easily change even if you receive new evidence. Suppose that I've never been to Milan before, and I've heard that it's often sunny in spring in Milan. I come to Milan and there is a week of rain. And now I'm thinking, maybe this is just not true. I'm lowering my resilience in this belief, while for somebody who's lived there all their life, 1 week of rain will not make them change their mind, because they have a much richer experience, a longer experience, and they will retain this belief. So their belief is going to be more resilient towards the incoming defeaters or counter evidence. Okay, so briefly, conciliatory epistemic norm will be modeled as such that after updating beliefs on their evidence, agents will split the difference in the sense of taking the average of all the learned credences from other agents. And we will retain the variance of their subjective probability distribution. So the variance won't change, just the mean of their probability distribution will change. In case of the steadfast epistemic norm, agents will learn credences by other agents, but these credences won't have an impact on them. So they hear what others believe, but they don't care. They stick to their guns. And so these agents will be equivalent to standard agents in bandit models, who simply form their beliefs on the basis of first-order evidence, the evidence which they acquire through research, and evidence acquired through research coming from other scientists, but they won't care about beliefs which they, or credences which they learn from other scientists. And then different norms impacting confidence. are going to be the following three. So first we considered epistemic confidence weakening, where agents lower their confidence or resilience when faced with disagreement, and we model that by variance increasing. So these agents keep the means of their subjective probability distributions, but they increase the variance. And for epistemic confidence boosting, they will boost their confidence when faced with agreements. So these agents, so the first agents, the confidence weakening, are agents who, when they meet those they disagree with, they become a bit less confident in their beliefs, while epistemic confidence boosting is such that when these agents meet somebody whom they agree with, they become a bit more confident in their belief. And then we also look at epistemic confidence mixed norm, where agents react both to agreements and disagreements. So we are just combining different epistemic norms and zetetic norms, and then we see what happened for the whole community, whether they are successful in their inquiry in converging on the better of two bandits or not. Okay, so let's look at the results. So we vary combinations of these different epistemic and zetetic norms, and we measure the performance of the group by looking at the number of runs in which the community converges on the better of two hypotheses. And here are some parameters we used in simulations, which we can look later on. For now, I don't think they are very important. But if there are questions in Q&A, we can come back to that. Okay, so the reductive zetetic norm. So this is the business as usual in bandit model. So to say, here agents simply pursue what they believe. And here we see plots for the conciliatory agents and steadfast agents. And we see that steadfast agents, so on the x-axis, you see the number of agents in a group. And on the y-axis, you see how successful they are in converging on the better of two theories. And so the higher they are, the better the performance of the community. So what we see here is that under reductive zetetic norm, steadfast populations outperform the conciliatory populations, and in some sense this conforms to Duven's original result that there is a merit in steadfastness. However, what is interesting is that epistemic confidence boosting performs even better. So recall, this was this norm which allows scientists to boost their confidence when they meet others they agree with, which is not necessarily what we would consider a rational behavior of individual epistemic agents. But at the level of the community, under this norm of inquiry, it leads to a better overall outcome. Okay, let's now change the zetetic norm. So now we will look at the exploratory zetetic norm, where agents most of the time pull from the bandit, from the bandit they consider to be better, but they have a small probability also to pull from the other theory. So what we see here is that epistemic, conciliatory, and steadfast norm perform equally good. So they are still this marked with this green and red colors, but confidence weakening, which was the norm according to which agents were weakening their confidence when they meet others who disagree with them, that one also performs basically equally well. And epistemic confidence boosting and mixed norms perform worse. So they are below, under this more exploratory norm. So now we look at the sticky zetetic norm, where agents stick to their current theory for a certain number of rounds, and then they abandon it only after they have heard that the other theory is better for so and so many rounds. So here, this is just the parameter of the model, how many rounds they have to wait before they abandon their current theory. And here we see that steadfast populations again outperform the conciliatory populations, but the difference is smaller than it was with the reductive zetetic norm. Similarly, boosting agents, so the confidence boosting agents, still perform better, but the difference is again smaller. So we have here again a different result. So let's look at this. Is now a leaderboard with all these different results. So in the columns, you see different epistemic norms, so steadfastness, conciliation, and different, and then 3 norms which change the confidence. And in the rows, you see different zetetic norms, the reductive zetetic norm, exploratory, and the sticky zetetic norm. And what is really interesting is that there is no epistemic norm which performs the best under all zetetic norms. So for instance, confidence boosting performs really well under these 2 norms, so the first and the third, reductive and the sticky, but it doesn't perform so well if agents are exploratory. And then we see that actually when agents are exploratory, then the steadfast norm performs the best. So what this means is that none of the epistemic norms ensures the best performance across the board. What we have instead is a sort of synergy effect. Epistemic confidence boosting has a positive effect when combined with reductive zetetic norm and sticky zetetic norm, but a negative effect with exploratory zetetic norms. So we have this synergies between the norms, and so there is a bundle of norms which together leads to a better outcome, but independently, it's very hard to say that which one will be best. So let me conclude on the basis of these results. So it turns out that zetetic norms do matter. So the upshot of this is that we should get rid of this reductive and irrelevance thesis, and instead what we should go for is what we call the bundle thesis. In the context of epistemic performance on groups, epistemic and zetetic norms are tightly connected and should be studied in bundles. So that means that if you want to know what is the best epistemic norm for the given community, well, it will really be important what will be the zetetic norm accompanying this one. If you want to understand what kind of behavior or which zetetic norms would be beneficial for the scientific community, then we can look at these combinations of epistemic and zetetic norms and study them in bundles in order to better understand the performance of the given community. So of course, this is just the start. We have presented here one quite simple model, which should not be taken as telling us something important about the actual scientific disagreement. The idea was rather to test whether this is to make a proof of a concept, really, that different combinations of epistemic and zetetic norms can lead to different outcomes. But going beyond the bundle thesis, this raises the question, can we say anything more general about the interplay of inquisitive and epistemic norms? And this leads us towards developing an account of social zetetic norms. So these would be norms of collective inquiry that concern the question, what are optimal combinations of individual zetetic and epistemic norms that facilitate collective, successful collective inquiry? And we can ask this question in different contexts of inquiry. So for instance, we can look at how these norms behave when it comes to the optimal division of cognitive labor, when it comes to collaboration in science, when it comes to safeguarding science from bias and deception, or when it comes to avoiding polarization and fragmentation and similar phenomena. So in all of these contexts, it would be interesting to study different combinations of epistemic and zetetic norms in order to understand under which conditions scientists are better off. So another interesting point is to look further into scenarios involving scientific disagreements. So recall the independence thesis, according to which the norms guiding individual rationality and group rationality or collective performance may come apart. And so suppose that from the perspective of individual rationality, we want to settle on a certain epistemic norm, let's say some form of conciliationism, or let's say epistemic confidence weakening, because we think from an epistemological point of view that this is a rational norm guiding individual scientists. Then we can ask, okay, if we take this epistemic norm as as something which we don't want to give up, what kind of zetetic norms do we need in order to reach successful performance at the level of the community? So even though the independence thesis says that individual and group performance may come apart, perhaps there are ways to circumvent this problem by focusing on different combinations of epistemic and zetetic norms where this trade-off could be lowered, or the impact could be lowered at least. What about modeling with other frameworks? So I was looking now at the bandit modeling framework and how we can study scientific disagreements through this framework. But for instance, in our previous work, we have looked at argumentation-based model where agents explore an argumentative landscape, which represents rivaling scientific theories. And then they gradually reveal arguments which represent reasons for or against the given theory. Actually, the reasons against are represented as argumentative attacks, which are these arrows coming from an argument in one theory towards another. And now what we found in this paper, which was published a few years ago already, is that if scientists prefer theories that have a larger scope, we represent that in terms of the number of defensible arguments which they find in the given theory, then a stick inquisitive norm leads to a better collective inquiry than if scientists very easily abandon their current theory. So if scientists have this epistemic norm, which makes them prefer theories, I would consider that to be an epistemic norm. What kind of theories do you prefer? So if you evaluate a certain theory as better because of a certain number of, because of the larger scope, then if you are stickier to that theory in your inquiry, that might actually benefit the collective inquiry. And there are other questions which could be asked with this framework, which are different from questions which we are asking with bandit modeling framework. So that again belongs to future research. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, let me just